regions. It's based on population density, and then your service statistics primarily. And most systems, I would say today, use it for what we call preventive maintenance in the biz, as they say. And that's really, it's kind of a capital cost, but it can be, a lot of systems when they're doing their accounting put it in their operating, so it's oil changes and keep maintaining buses basically over time. And that's why you see the percentages that we saw for federal participation on operating. It's primarily through that preventive maintenance program. And those dollars are 80% federal, 20% non-federal match. There are some instances where you can actually use it for operating, paying drivers. Rick, do you use any of it for just a little bit for paratransit?
Yeah, we have the capability because of the new legislation to do that, but that money all goes into preventive maintenance.
It's all PM. So and I would say that's true for most systems. Even the big systems get whatever they can get. They put into that realm. There were some small systems or small funding sources that were created prior to MAP 21 that have now been sort of rolled into this one. Job access reverse commute. Some of you might know that one by terms. That used to be 5316, is now rolled into 5307, and that was just it was a program they put out to deal with job access and reverse commute. 5309 is where New Starts is. That's where we're doing large investments. It's a very rigorous and competitive process. They haven't done it officially yet, but FTA is moving towards evaluation criteria on New Starts to kind of go from what we call a cost per travel time saved type of thing. It's a evaluation criteria that really favors long haul, congested corridors, longer trips, and getting past traffic. Basically, commuter rail fit really well into that. They're moving towards more of a ridership based, and even on top of that, a low income ridership based. So they have transit disadvantaged populations out there. Somebody rides from that population, it's worth 2 rides basically. So it's a cost per ridership type of evaluation criteria, which favors a much more urban core, shorter haul type of system. So, it's funny, I've done a lot of streetcar work around the country, and we couldn't get a dime out of New Starts for years and years and years because it was a lot of short haul type of trips. And now
doing commuter rail work and getting New Starts.
Yeah, and getting New Starts, and now the script is flipped on that. So we have both in this region. So that we try to identify some project in the region that might be able to access those funds based on the new competition. Typically, in a financial plan, what we'll do is we'll assume some smaller percentage of each project in the system would get some funding. In Austin, we use 25%. So we're saying every project in our region is going to get 25% federal dollars, with the assumption that one might get closer to 50 and one might get closer. So we can try to set that, based on some professional assumptions by yours truly. There is one formula program under 5309, which is fixed guideway modernization. It's based on a formula, and it kicks in 7 years after you've implemented fixed guideway. And this is FTA's effort to help you maintain the capital side of your investment over time. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's some. I'll just quickly go through this. I kind of want to get to the funding document. The document that you have in front of you, we grouped them sort of by geographic area, city versus county versus state, but they can be grouped in other ways. And one other way to do it is looking at them from what they call traditional funding sources for transit. This is out of the TCRP report that talks about how transit is funded in the U.S. We'll be talking about each of these categories, but the non-traditional are ones like value capture, which would be like a TIF, or some sort of tax increment financing. Other others that might not have a real nexus. We talked about nexus with transit, like a real estate transaction type of funding mechanism or source. And then there's market-based, which, you know, maybe at some point in our discussions, not today necessarily, is sort of talking about user fees versus non-user fees. You know, on the highway side of things, they're always talking about user fees. And the user fee that's equated under transit is fares. And highway advocates always get frustrated when you talk about user fees on the transit side of the house. But, I mean, their subsidies are every bit as high as transit. So there's a lot of instances, I don't know if you remember, but those percentages back on that page of other local or other funding sources, things like toll receipts, you know, managed lanes and types of things that are corridor-based types of funding sources can be used for transit. I mean, it's a very good nexus with putting a bus on a HOV lane, for instance, those types of things, and using your managed lane funds to help fund the operations of that express route. We talked a little bit about the difference between funding sources and a revenue and a financing. We can give you some information about some financing out there that's specific to transportation. TIFIA, probably the most known. Transportation Infrastructure Financing Initiative, I think, something like that. I never remember the acronyms, but TIFIA at the federal level is really low-cost bond, and it's got a lot of features to it, like you can delay principal payments for 5 years. It's a financing tool, but it helps get cash early, and it's a much lower rate, and it's federally supported. It's federally bonded. Other types are like the grant anticipation notes. A lot of systems, when they get what's called a full funding grant agreement for a new start, they get, okay, FTA, you're agreeing to give us $250 million for our project. You can get a note, go get a note and get that money earlier, because they usually pay it over a number of years when they do that, when they honor their full funding grant agreement.
And for an example, like on TIFIA, your percentage is typically, what are they running at, the rate, like 3%?
It's prime plus a quarter or something. It's ridiculous, like 3.1% or something like that. And they only will fund up to a third of your project with the TIFIA loan. So typically it's used for really big ones. You know, and you're having trouble getting all of the financing put together. We already talked about this, you know, our goals for this process, and I guess what I'd like to do is open up the floor and talk about anything that you see on this page, or if there's anything you think is missing. Obviously, if something comes to your mind after today, we'd love to hear about it. I kind of intended to kind of go through these, but I don't know if we have time for that, and we have a couple of clicker questions for you. Is there anything on here that people would like more information on? We talked about sales tax, talked about property tax, hotel tax, tips.
So is property tax in or out here?
It's available. I mean, a city or county could pass an initiative for property taxes to use it for capital. To the best of my knowledge, that's all property taxes can be used for in cities is capital, and counties can use it for operations. But it is difficult to, as I think you all know, to get property, even dedicated property taxes, additional property taxes passed by the voters.
Are you familiar with anybody layering in a property tax that's applicable only to commercial property? Or property that's owned commercial only? I mean, if you're talking about building a system that's built for commuters to businesses, right?
Right.
It seems like theoretically you might be able to fund that through. I was thinking earlier.
It sounds good in theory. I'm not a lawyer in the state of Oklahoma, but I would
I am, I'm just not licensed. So I can ask stupid questions.
I don't know that it's legal to do that, actually, what I'm saying.
Hang on a second. I think from property tax perspective, overall, I think you're really limited to type of TIF type of arrangement. Tax increment financing, which would be at a smaller district level. You would do it on the fringes to support development of stations and those types of things. TIFs can be either property tax or sales tax. And they typically have a very, very finite geographic district, which they're using. Mayor, what is your experience for using TIFs in Oklahoma City?
Well, I think we have 8 TIF districts inside Oklahoma City. So we've had success. If you're talking about getting buy-in from the taxation organizations, the schools, the county, the library system, they've easily seen the wisdom in it long-term.
Usually though, TIFs have a finite date.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of experience for using them for O&M.
Right.
There's a lot of states that allow it, but there's not a lot of actual experience out there where people are using it for O&M. Operating and maintenance, sorry.
I believe they're committed to 25 years in Oklahoma.
That's right.
Are any of these systems, do they receive any revenue from advertisement? And is that something that
It's part of the other category.
Okay.
It's not typically, I mean, it needs to be in here. I mean, we need to,
Yeah. You have station naming rights.
Right.
Like
yeah.
Chesapeake Station, as an example, or
Right.
something like that.
When I'm working up one of these major league spreadsheets and we're trying to figure out cash flows and things like that, I typically don't put that in there, just as being conservative.
Right.
You know, but if you're getting, I think DART is getting like $2.5 million a year
Dart,
in advertising, and that would be one of the
that's
more than that.
Dart is getting 2.5, but they're not getting as much as other systems because they're not allowed to advertise for liquor and gaming type uses on their cars. But some of the other systems are actually getting more revenue than that. But it's operating revenue. You know, it's in the less than 1% of operation range.
Any other questions?
I guess there's a couple here. If you go to number 13 and 14 under state, we've added a few in here that this is emission tax and mobility use tax that are not, they do not currently exist. They're not legislatively enabled in Oklahoma, but they are methods in other states that, at least in theory, have a good yield associated with them. Emission tax is typically a fee that would be tacked on to registration based on the size of your engine. So you pay more if you had 12 cylinders versus one with 3. You know, and depending on what those numbers are, you know, what your dollar amount is per car, that can generate a good slug of funding. Mobility use tax is very much a user fee, and it's typically calculated on a number of miles. And I don't know any. I don't think there's any. They might have toyed with a pilot program in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, and Washington, but it would be, you might get a set of number of mileage on your car. It would check your odometer at registration or inspection, I mean. And you might get 10,000 a year, and then above that you would pay per mile or per 5,000 miles or whatever. And those typically generate some yield. So we can do some math to kind of see what kind of yield that would generate. But those are alternatives to sales tax, and they're new. They would take legislative, and we'll continue sort of turning over the rocks to see if there's any other ideas out there. But those are kind of two that we've added in here that have traction in other parts of the country.
We don't do inspections anymore.
Well, I guess we'll take it off the list.
Well,
We got to figure out a way. I mean,
that can
there's
change. I mean, you can change the legislation, but
the region's not. We're not in non-attainment or maintenance area or you know, so too much wind.
The region is, we're taking.
Violation of the same.
Yeah, but with designation having been made, so we may be looking at 2016 and that timeframe may seem close.
So, you know, if we're talking about, you know, trying to sort of fight this financial plan for a number of years and then coming up with something later on that might be something that we use to dedicate to transit, then that might be an option, you know, especially since that's on the horizon. So, I mean, we could look at it that way as well. Sure, you want to mention it?
Yeah, I just go back to the larger issue of sales tax. I mean, the more common application, as I think we talked about earlier, is either an existing transportation agency expanding its funding base, which in this case would be potentially COPTA, or an additional transportation authority would be set up, and I believe that's what's been discussed in your governance discussions here. And just to reflect upon what state legislation is here, is that that a transportation authority has the ability to be established by a city or a county or multiple cities and counties, and to levy a sales tax rate of up to 2%. Now, that does, of course, require voter approval, but
That's in
that
place now.
appears, at least on first blush, to be the most versatile sort of sales tax-based funding approach that could be used here.
I mean, I guess just want to add, it also should be noted that Oklahoma does not have a cap on it. I mean, typically you get up
on the total
sales tax in a given district. But, you know, Oklahoma City is getting up close to, is it between 8 and 9%?
Most of the cities are over 8%. And so there is a market cap, if you will, out there to what the competitive marketplace is in terms of total sales tax that people feel comfortable paying. So I think there's obviously going to be some challenge to increasing the sales tax rate unless the voters, you know, feel there's a compelling benefit to what they're getting. The third one there that's listed, you know, again, it varies around the country, but there are various cities and counties that levy a fairly significant real estate transfer tax of 1% or 2% tax on the sale or resale of homes, and that has the potential of generating a lot of revenue in a particular region. Whether that's something that is legal. I mean, there's already a real estate transfer tax at the state level, but it's a fairly nominal fee. It's called the dock or stamp tax, and
Transfer.
And it's at the statewide level, although it's administered at the county level. That whether you could pass it here, whether you could do something locally or not is legal, I'm not sure. And if you could, is there enough of a nexus between a real estate tax and funding a transit improvement? That's questionable as well.
I think you can, I mean, legally you can pass it here, but I think that there would be very low support on it because there would be so many people who would be impacted by it that are not serviced by those.
I agree with you. That's what we
I think
say.
there'd be
That's a
low
real issue.
tolerance
That's
for
a
it.
low nexus, we would say, so.
Okay. We have a couple of quicker questions that we'd like to do. I mean, are there any other discussion on anything on this list? I did want to throw, while they're sitting, do you need some time to set it up? Or? I wondered what the committee's thoughts were on some of these gaming taxes, and, you know, we haven't done all our research in terms of what those funds go towards necessarily. I know that some of them are with the tribal nations, but, I mean,
Well, they get all except the portion that the state
Right.
gets. So the state gets 18%
Oh, that's right, that's
of AGP, but tribes get everything else.
does the committee think that is a potential, I don't know how much is in the region.
a lot.
A lot. I guess it's one we definitely should keep on the list.
Gaming, yes, the lottery, I don't think so. The lottery, people approved it for school.
For education,
And
typically.
that was how it was sold and how it passed.
There are